Welcome, everyone, to the Leading Together podcast, Insights for Delaware's Tomorrow. In each episode, we sit down with the leading minds from Delaware and across the nation who have conversations with us that help us advance First State Educate's mission, which is to build capacity, raise awareness, and really elevate school board leadership across our communities. I'm Julia Keller, Executive Director of First State Educate, and I'm your host for the show. Today, we have a fantastic guest. This is going to be one of the most fascinating conversations that we've had. I'm excited to welcome Dr. Seth Hunter. He's an associate professor of education leadership and policy at George Mason University, a senior fellow at Ed Policy Forward, and a fellow with the Tennessee Research Association Alliance. So in a lot of different spaces, hearing a lot of different conversations, a lot of unique perspectives. But his work spans educator effectiveness, evaluation, observation systems, coaching, the whole gamut. And really, what he uses his research is to inform policymaking, and he's creating really emerging partnerships in what is on the top of everyone's mind is AI, humans and machines. He's got deep experience we're going to hear about in research methods, K-12. He's been at state agencies, the Teacher Association. I mean, Seth's perspective here is really one of a kind because it's very rare that you're going to get someone who's been in all of these different rooms at all of these different levels. But at the core of his career, really what he's focused on, and he'll tell us in his own words, but it's using evidence to inform decisions. And that's something that's so important to demystify how we use things and really democratize access so that every educator, every policymaker can act on what we know. And Seth, thank you for being part of this conversation with Delaware, for spending some time with us today.
Julia, that was a very flattering intro. I'm so happy to be here and join your series. This is also, I think, an awesome series that you and your team have put together for Delaware policymakers and school boards. So just a great pleasure to join you on today's episode.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And your idea is just from the moment that I sort of discovered it, this idea, like when educators have clear, accessible evidence, people know kind of what data, what the research says, they make better decisions. And your whole career has been about helping people kind of do their job, right? It's so empowering. And why this? How did this become sort of the driving force in your career?
Yeah, so I'll try not to out my age here as I describe, but it started really, once upon a time I was a classroom teacher in Kentucky, and due to some involvement in our state teachers union, I eventually made the switch from the classroom into state leadership. And, when I was in the classroom, and something as simple as like PLCs in my classroom, teachers pulling data, looking at assessment results, attendance patterns, we did our best to make decisions based on the available evidence. And when I transitioned into my position in the Kentucky Department of Education, I was working with multiple school boards, multiple superintendents, assistant superintendents in the context of the Common Core rollout. And I think what I noticed was that people were making decisions for a lot of reasons, based on a lot of things. Some of them were based on evidence. Some of them were not based on evidence. And my undergraduate training was in economics and mathematics. I'm a very analytical thinker. Mm-hmm. And it was just, on some levels, it was fascinating to me what fed into leaders' decisions and what also fed into policymakers' decisions. And I think I can kind of illustrate, this is, just to protect the innocent, I'm not going to use an actual real world example, but this is based on multiple real world examples that I'm sure you and I and your listeners are very familiar with. So, picture this, there's a school board meeting. There's consideration to buy some new math technology. And you have some teachers going up who have used the technology, telling these very vivid stories of what worked and how much they love this technology. You might have parents coming up potentially in tears because as their children have used that technology, they've seen that growth in their kid that they've wanted to see for years. And then the vendor comes up and has put together this very compelling presentation for the board members. And I do not want to discount those stories at all, but those are just a few stories. And the concern is that um, the decision makers let a handful of stories drive
Mhm.
decision making instead of systematic research, not necessarily conducted by someone like me. It could be a program evaluation, but
Mhm.
be someone in your organization. Um, and that dynamic, the story pulling us into decision making, look, we are wired to do that. Um,
Mhm.
our brains, evolution, we have not evolved to become analytic thinkers. Stories are incredibly impactful, and we should listen to them, but it shouldn't drive decisions that's going to affect thousands of students, teachers,
So,
um, all by itself.
yeah.
So that just that pull towards the stories or political influence, whatever it is, anything that wasn't based on the evidence, was just fascinating to me.
I agree with you. You've seen these stories that come up, and it seems to be the story that we get swayed by rather than all of the evidence that could be out there. The evidence maybe many times doesn't actually even make it to the conversation. So
Mhm.
this raises for me a question: how has like this notion of data-driven decision making changed? It started out as like an accountability kind of concept, right? What is it today, or what's the way we should use it?
Oh man, that's a great question. Yeah, and so I'll just go back. Like I was a teacher in kind of the very early, a classroom teacher in the very early days of No Child Left Behind.
Mhm.
And at that time, it was in my personal experience. So now here I am talking. I was like, don't listen to the experience and the
No
stories.
age,
I am
no
sharing
age.
stories
Oh, right.
that my colleagues and I, and actually research does back this up. It's There's no shortage of data. It's did my colleagues and I have the time and the skills and the capacity to use it to make good instruction?
Mhm.
And especially like 20 years ago, in my experience, for the most part, no. Then, around the like race to the top era, the big incentive was to bring data into HR, like teacher effectiveness,
Mm.
educator effectiveness. And again, there also, just because evidence exists, not all evidence is equal, right? And so
Great.
that was when value added modeling like really came onto the scene in
Yep.
some states. And there, while that's an example of some evidence that could be used for some decision making, my read of the literature is that it actually has a narrower usage. But it was just like more data. So it's like since No Child Left Behind, all the way until where we are, it's not like we've started setting data aside. We're just getting more and more and more
Mhm.
data.
Mhm.
And when I was working with, I'm sure this colleague of mine, Cricket McClure, if she's still out there, was an assistant superintendent in Kentucky, and she would say that schools and districts were often data rich and decision poor.
Mm.
And I feel like in a lot of ways that's still where we are. Again, it's not to knock on ability or skill set. Part of it is just
Mhm.
time. And do people
Mhm.
have the time to wade through the mountains of data that their
Mhm.
districts provide them? And the last thing I'll say, as far as like kind of how just a limitation maybe of this mountain of data is, I served very small districts with maybe, well, some districts had one high school, some just like two or three,
Mhm.
versus where I live right now. There are dozens of high schools. And the capacity of like a central office in one of those small districts to support decision making looks very different from a smaller resource strapped setting to one that has boatloads of resources. So in some ways, I think it's actually become more challenging
Mhm.
because there's just so much more data and
Mm-hmm.
no one ever takes anything off the plate to say,
Mm-hmm.
some time for you to now use it to
Right.
make decisions.
And I think that is a very true point. I mean, uh, I think there's an inherent risk in the system where the further you move away from the classroom, sometimes you're apt to forget and to think that, well, we should be looking at data. Yeah, but when am I supposed to do that? Because I have kids in front of me from 7:30 to 2:30, right? Like, where in there am I supposed to find time to meet with my colleagues to do that? And then a lot of times, even if, and this is the other thing I wanted to ask you about, like, sometimes research and data is not even presented in a way that's kind of super crystal clear for you. You have to, like, no, you need the time to look at it, but then you have to figure out, because they've kind of packaged it in a way that, I don't know, isn't always user friendly.
No, look, academics like me, we do a terrible job of
Mhm.
presenting the data in digestible ways. That is, I think, now as a academic, tenured professor at Mason, that still persists today. There's a lot of incentives for people like me to do very rigorous research, but there's less incentives for me to make it digestible for board members or
Mhm.
even principals, even an instructional coach. I've worked with instructional coaches in the past who they had a little bit of slack in their schedule. There was some time built out for them to, prepare and support teachers in whatever
Mhm.
endeavor they were setting out to achieve. And they started looking to the research, and what academics have learned about research use by educators, policymakers, decision makers love books. Books are a great way to consume data because they're written in much friendlier terms.
Mhm.
Ed Week, kind of periodicals. What you do, you're kind of
Mhm.
translating evidence in ways that can help it reach a broader audience. But that's the tip of the iceberg when it comes to evidence use. What Works Clearinghouse at the Institute
Mhm.
of Education Sciences, Evidence for ESSA out of Johns Hopkins and other
Mhm.
places, they've tried to gain some traction in this
Mhm.
translation space, but there's still so much more research and evidence out there that could inform decision making. And I think it's partially, and one of the reasons why it doesn't is people like me oftentimes don't put it in a format
Mhm.
so that those outside of academia can understand it, especially super
Mhm.
busy people who
Yeah.
don't have hours to pour over, tables and graphs and whatnot.
Yeah. No, and I agree. And the other thing I appreciate what you're doing is you keep bringing it back to boards, and First Aid Educate is focused on developing the capacity of school boards. But so I appreciate that about your answers. But I think you're making a larger, very, very important point that's broadly applicable. Is that it's got to be, it's, if people can't access it and can't understand it, then we're not really, we're not helping the cause here. So in that, I wanted to get your thoughts on a pilot that we're doing around data-driven decision making in Delaware. We have 3 school districts that are piloting an innovative approach to training school boards, right? Because these people are making very, very, very important decisions over hundreds of millions of dollars, and they have great intentions, right? And they want to make good decisions, but sometimes they don't have access. Like you were saying, it's not packaged for the board member. It's not actually getting there. Other things are getting there. Stories are getting there. And now we're talking about the real world, right? So, like, you know, how could a board try to be more grounded in data and evidence-based decision making? Like, what's a thing?
Mhm.
Why is it important for them to even want to do that?
So I think the importance goes back to, you just touched on it. I think about the inputs and the outputs. The outputs in this case are students' lives, and so just on the benefit side, I think every policymaker, whether you're the board member of one of those tiny school districts I was
Mhm.
talking about or a metropolis, um, your decisions affect hundreds of students, well, maybe
Mhm.
hundreds, potentially hundreds of thousands. The second is we board members are stewards of public resources. So
Mhm.
while evidence might suggest, let's say, one intervention can improve reading scores for all kids by a grade
Mhm.
level, if that costs $200 million, like there's trade-offs involved, right? And so I
Right.
think you have to consider both the resources. Is it cost effective? Is it effective on the benefit side? And then is it cost effective on the input side? And then you ask, like, how can we kind of encourage this? And this is where I am not aware, frankly, of any organization that like has like the silver bullet, so to speak, in this, because it goes back to time, and it goes back to some of those. Again, in some ways, our brains have been hardwired throughout evolution to not be analytical, and so very well-meaning school board members, they listen to those compelling stories. They bring in their own biases, as does everybody.
Everybody, sure.
They are susceptible to things like, and again, what I'm saying here is not to pick on school board.
No.
Even though I know the research, I do this all the time myself. There's bandwagon effects, like fads, like, oh, the school district next door is doing it, we should be doing it. Political and social pressures are one of the things that can, especially in board members. I mean, I live in Northern Virginia, and you've seen some of my board members on national news,
right?
And they are very gets a lot of attention, a whole lot of attention. And sometimes board members are saying, look, I just need to keep the peace. Yeah. Like if it's a trade-off between keeping the peace versus like going back to the evidence sometimes. So there's all these things that pull us away from evidence-based decision making. The kind of common suggestion is for a board to partner up with an organization like yours, or potentially like faculty from a university, and effectively we can serve as like a critical friend. And what I mean by that is we're not like in the back criticizing, but we're on the side. And after the board has heard that compelling story, we raise our hands and we can say, okay, board member Hunter, is there any research? What's the research behind this proposal? So that reminder, that critical friend can serve as that kind of push for the evidence. There are some, I have some maybe crazy ideas on how AI could help too, like maybe before a policy is adopted, you could build out an AI that would say something like you're talking about the policy with an AI, and you can train the AI to be that critical friend, not as us, but
right. Of course not.
To some extent,
unless we made the model.
Right, and we can fine tune it. But basically, there just needs to be like a second layer of some type of critical friend that's pushing for where show me the data instead of show me the money, show me the data, show me the evidence. And but I just want to also say I'm not naive, and I know that there are a lot of pressing policy decisions for which good data just don't exist.
Doesn't exist, right?
Then what do you do in those scenarios? Again, oftentimes what happens are you might test out a pilot in one or two schools, gain some evidence, even if it's not the best, to inform that system-wide policy. And I know, again, the constant battle is time. And I also know that school board members are under pressure sometimes to produce results. And again, that's the press to adopt something if it's not evidence-based. And so again, that's where the critical friend could say, I know you need to adopt something. I know your constituents are wanting something now, but what's the trade-off? We could give them something now, but is it going to be a waste of money? And is it going to help kids? And if it doesn't, if it doesn't help kids, and if it's not a good use of public money, I would be the critical friend and say, can we just wait a couple months and come back?
Right. Exactly. I think I want to go next to the AI topic, but one last question on this about the boards and the use of data. It's a question that I have. Part of this is practice, right? Is it helpful if boards create a culture of questioning things, or a culture of, like the norm becomes
Yes,
looking for a researcher, right? Like it seems like that can be
so
supportive in a lot of ways.
absolutely. The you're getting me all choked up here, Julia.
You're excited about the culture.
Um, no, I'll share. In near where I work right now, a few years ago, there was a superintendent hired who came in with a very strong vision of evidence use. I've worked in multiple districts in Kentucky, worked with multiple districts in Tennessee. I also have a research practice partnership with about 100 districts in Missouri. This superintendent and her crystal clear vision of evidence use set the tone and the culture. She works at the behest of the board, but she at least has set a very clear culture in the central office. And so what are some of the ways that she's done that? You have to move beyond value statements and words on paper. And so but sometimes the answer isn't complicated. Sometimes it's as simple as I sit on a working group in that district. I'm the researcher with their program evaluators. And the superintendent just introduced a very simple protocol at the end of every meeting. We just go through a list of kind of like critical friend types of questions. What evidence was used? What are the barriers? And so we never leave a meeting without talking about evidence, its limitations, et cetera. And then she and her immediate like assistant superintendents, and they're responsible on the follow through to make sure when they get those reports. But I think it's got to start. It's got to start at the top. I think if you have a superintendent that can bring that to a school board, that's a great place to start. And again, you don't have to change the system. You can do a small but mighty change, like those protocols, and that can make a big difference.
Yep. Okay, great. I agree. I like the protocol. I'm going to take that for my pilot. I think I'm going to try to see if anybody likes that idea. So small but mighty. The AI thing, which is just, I mean, to me, just the most exciting aspect. I enjoy the time that I go back and forth with it and iterate and question and challenge. And, so what do you see as the opportunity that AI is bringing to education?
Oh my gosh. It is. I can give you an answer today, Julia, and if we met 3 months from now, it would probably be a different answer. So let me share some specific ways that I know it's being used and some ways that we're trying to encourage it to be used. I'm actually going to say something that might surprise some of your listeners. I know that there is so much buzz and peer pressure and those vivid anecdotes and those compelling, charismatic vendors out there trying to push AI into the instructional space. I think we need to throw some cold water on AI in the instructional space because, again, we don't know what works. There is very little, if any, rigorous evidence.
Research, right. We go back to the beginning.
Right, exactly. And we are hearing, now these are anecdotes, but it is, and that's the case, this is early science. This is very early science, and this is the scientific process. But sadly, there's anecdotes of students and chatbots interacting in ways that can sometimes be harmful to the student. And so, plus with instruction, you bring up so many questions about privacy, equity, data privacy. I mean, so some of the ways that we've encouraged our one of my teams has encouraged partners in our area to use it is actually on the operational administrative side. Number one, the barriers to entry to using that technology by the central office are far lower than a teacher with children. So things like figuring transportation schedules, busing schedules, HR decisions, looking at, and this is where I think we have seen a team I'm on, we've conducted multiple
Mhm.
interviews with
Mhm.
several senior leaders in our region, and we're seeing glimmers of hope about that problem of data rich and decision poor. Because
Mhm.
if time and kind of if you need a PhD and you need time to understand
Mhm.
all that data, so many places in the US and the world just can't do it, right?
Right.
AI doesn't have a PhD, but it
Mhm.
is getting smart. And one of the things it does really well is looking at data sets. So for the kinds of data where we're not as concerned about privacy issues,
Mhm.
um, that's a great entry point for its use. Also,
Mhm.
we have been training people to use AI to make evidence-based decision making
Mhm. Mhm.
based on decades of prior research. Whereas it used to take, I think of it like a professor in your pocket. Uh,
Mhm.
Instead
Mhm.
of me needing to attend and do a lit review and come
Right.
in 15 minutes, there are tools out there that, again, I don't picture a board member typing into the AI, but what I picture would be an assistant to the board or an
Like
organization
our
like
organization.
ours
Right. Mhm.
on
Mhm.
the side. When a question comes up about reading interventions, you type
Mhm.
it in, you get an answer, a lit review in like
Mhm.
10 minutes.
Mhm. Mhm.
So I think on there's other examples with course scheduling, and again, my recommendation right now, as far as like
Mhm.
where it's used system wide, would be
Mhm.
administration and operations, while encouraging experimentation by
Mhm.
some teachers or schools,
Mhm.
piloting, seeing what
Mhm.
works, what doesn't, and then once you learn from those pilots, then maybe do a system wide scale up. Um, so yeah, one you didn't ask this question, but just something real
Mhm.
that I think a board could do to encourage this is most districts at this point in time have something like a instructional technology type of position, like
Mhm. Mhm.
central office based or school based. If boards could maybe redefine slightly what those positions entail to carve out
Mhm.
maybe 10 to 20% of their time right now to focus on AI applications so that you
Mhm.
can get some of that school-based support for those pilots.
Right.
That I think is definitely something that a board could do.
Mhm.
Also, if there are boards out there that don't have something like an AI task force, uh,
Mhm.
I think it's very important to have a select group of people. I would encourage those groups to reach out
Mhm.
to universities and et cetera. But those are kind of two
Yep.
relatively low hanging fruit or
Mhm.
advice that boards
Yep.
might be able to take up in this space.
Yeah. Thanks so much. You actually, that was my final question was going to be that sort of what can boards do. But this conversation has been everything that I had hoped for and more. I'm taking so much away. I think the one thing that's going to stay with me, I think, for a long time is this: don't be moved by the story. You got to go a little bit past the story. And being data rich and decision poor, but really trying to find the time. And where we landed in the end is like AI can possibly create that. Another through line is this idea of pilots, which is exactly what we're getting ready to do. Let's test it out. Let's try and get a critical friend. I mean, I love that model too. But the small but mighty change is the thing, this little protocol. So many wonderful gems in everything that you shared with us today. I can't thank you enough for being part of this conversation and supporting our work.
Well, this has been a pleasure. I can't wait to hear about the exciting stories and evidence that comes out of Delaware and the work that you guys are doing. Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you. And to our listeners, thanks for joining us. We look forward to seeing you again. If you're looking for information or resources, be sure to visit our Knowledge Hub. Thanks for listening.